Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Krown Gridiron Nation on TSN. Joining us this week on the panel, once again, John Hodge from Winnipeg, Gord Randall's in Vancouver, and I'm Jim on Football Island getting ready to roll out the 2-minute offense. Syracuse, will they make a bowl game after starting 4-0? You thought it was a lead pipe cinch, but they're on a 4-game losing streak. At least Damian Alford caught 4 for 70 yards. Christian Vier, that's what we're calling him this week, quarterback for Pitt. He faced a tough Notre Dame defense, and he made his first mistakes of the year as a starter. 4 INT, not a great line against a dominant Notre Dame team. Curtis Rourke's stats line looked perfectly good, 25 of 39 for 313 and a TD. Not so great on the scoreboard, though, losing to division rival Miami of Ohio. Jeffrey Kenton-Arku with another great day. 4 tackles, 3 of them solo, and a fumble recovery against North Texas and a 3-point win. Jalen Smith on the other side with 3 stops. Isaiah Banya doing his job. 2 tackles, a TFL, a sack, and then he had a forced fumble on that sack. And guess what? He had a fumble recovery as well. One of the few highlights for BYU against Texas. Eli A-Manor, this guy right now cannot be stopped. He is on a roll. 9 receptions, 146 yards. Are you kidding me? And a trip to the promised land. Stanford stayed close, but were outclassed by Washington. Ray Tomlinson getting on the radar, an INT, and a couple of other numbers. Nice 43-yard return for Tomlinson in Richmond's win over Campbell. So Stanford, big losers again on the field, but Eli A-Manor, he's a big winner. He's the prime target for the Cardinal, and this kid's got a future, Gord.
Oh, very much so. He's quickly becoming the biggest story for Canadians south of the line this fall. He blew up, as everybody knows, against Colorado. And I'm not going to say this past weekend's performance was more impressive than that, but in some ways it was. He goes off, like Colorado's secondary. Travis Hunter is obviously legitimate talent, but the rest of that Colorado defense can be pretty leaky on the back end. Washington, on the other hand, who they played last weekend, this is a team currently tracking for a spot in the college football playoff, one of the best teams in the country, and one that is considered to have an elite defense. And it didn't matter. A-Manor goes off for 194 yards and a house call against that caliber of opponent. I was blown away that he was able to continue piling up those kinds of numbers against a Washington program that has been a DB factory. So this is another really good performance. And the great thing about A-Manor is he's not eligible for the NFL draft until a year from now. So we are guaranteed to see him again next fall, coming back in the college football ranks. And you can bet that starting from the beginning of the season next fall, he is going to be squarely in the NFL conversation. We've seen guys like Josh Palmer go in the mid-rounds of the NFL draft with less production than we've seen from Eli A-Manor so far. So he is a guy, I'm not going to say he's a first-round pick, but he's a guy who's going to be a prominent name in the next NFL draft cycle for sure.
One guy who I see potentially sneaking into the NFL picture in 2024 is Jeffrey Kenton-Arku, linebacker out of Memphis, originally from Levi, Quebec. He had another nice game, 4 tackles and a key fumble recovery for the Tigers, which put them ahead 38-21 after the offense cashed in from 30 yards out. They ended up needing that score against North Texas because North Texas ripped off 21 unanswered points in the fourth quarter before the Tigers were able to put it away 45-42. So the former Syracuse linebacker, I think, is one to watch. And if he's not in the NFL next year, he's going to be one of the first players taken off the board in the CFL draft and projects, in my opinion, as a future starter north of the border.
And I want to highlight a team with a couple Canadians on them that is looking like they might be quite an interesting team out west. And Tanner McLaughlin had a pretty quiet evening for the Arizona Wildcats, but they pile it on Oregon State and win fairly comfortably against what was the 11th ranked team in the country, I believe. And if you look at Arizona's schedule, like, guys, these guys might be legit. Jed Fish has done a great job of recruiting. Tetairoa McMillan was one of the top recruits in the country that shocked everybody by going to Arizona a year ago. They have lots of talent on offense, but they're clamping down on people on the defensive side. And if you look at their schedule so far, they're 5-3, but their 3 losses where they lose at Mississippi State in week 2 by 6 points. They lose at home to Washington by 6 points in a game that they led in the second half. And then they should have upset USC in LA, and they ran out of gas and lose by 2 points. Those are their only losses so far. So they've got a great test coming up this week because they host UCLA, who is another top 25 team. If they can knock off their second top 25 in a row, get to be bowl eligible, we should be paying a lot more attention to this Arizona Wildcat squad that's not just Tanner McLaughlin, but also Leif Magnuson starting on the offensive line too.
Well, how about Kyle Hergel, left guard for Boston College? He helped that unit run for 248 yards in a 21-14 win over UConn. This team started the season slowly, but the Eagles have now won 4 straight games against Syracuse next week. That's going to be a massive game for this club as they look to continue their winning streak. And Hergel, by the way, I see as an NFL caliber blocker. However, he is right on the cusp from a size standpoint, only 6'2". That is easily enough height for the CFL. We see CFL offensive linemen starting as small as 6 feet. However, that is right on the bubble for the NFL. You have to have elite athleticism to block at the NFL level at that size. Whether that is legitimate or a stigma that some NFL scouts I think is up for debate. But Hergel is as athletic as virtually any offensive lineman in the NCAA, and I see him potentially as an NFLer next year. If not, he's going to be another guy who goes extremely high in the CFL draft that is a potential day one starter at potentially guard or even center.
So, spoiler alert, who would join Eli A-Manor in our stateside 5? In at 5, it is Trey Tomlinson with his first INT for those Richmond Spiders, 4 tackles as well, and 2 pass breakups. We always keep an eye peeled for those Maine Black Bears, and Michael Monias from Montreal, Quebec, turns in a fantastic effort, 10 receptions, 96 yards, and a TD. Even though Ohio was on the wrong end of the score, Curtis Rourke had a solid day, 313 through the air and a TD, and a clean sheet on INTs. Noor-Gat Kuth, this kid gets better every game on the defensive line for Colorado State. 15 tackles, 1.5 TFL, and another dominant effort. And speaking of getting better week after week, Eli A-Manor, 9 receptions, 146 yards, and a TD against highly ranked Washington. Coming up, you won't believe the way Manitoba wrapped up their regular season. Welcome back, everyone. You know, the season's wrapped up and we're going into playoff season, but we can still count up to our Power 7. In at 7, it is the Saskatchewan Huskies. The Green Dogs get ready to face number 6, the Alberta Golden Bears, as they fall in the Power 7 thanks to a big home loss. The biggest winners of the week could be the Laval Rouge et Or because they sat on a bye and got ready for the upcoming playoffs. It was no contest in the Battle of Waterloo, and Laurier proved it. They stay at 4. A bit of a meltdown for the Montreal Carabin, leading 14-0 at half. They lose to Concordia and drop to 3. It was the biggest game in nearly 20 years for the Alberta Golden Bears, and the UBC Thunderbirds spoiled the party as they shoot to first in the Canada West and number 2 in the Power 7. And in at 1, it's the number 1 team in the OUA, the rested and cooled Western Mustangs. How about those purple ponies? Well, this falls into the in case you missed it category. It was all over social media, and it's one of the most spectacular meltdowns I think I've seen at the college football level. The Calgary Manitoba game, this one of the strangest endings I've ever seen to a college football game. John, take us through the anatomy of a meltdown.
Well, the Calgary Dinos started their season 0-5, and I think everybody forgot about them, except for the Dinos. This is a club that, after starting 0-5, two massive upset victories over UBC and Saskatchewan, which led them to this. If they beat the University of Manitoba Bisons by more than 13 points, they were headed to the postseason, which was unthinkable even just a couple of weeks ago. And they had a fantastic first quarter, put up 23 points, and they were leading with 12 seconds left, 35-15. All they had to do was kill the clock. And for some reason, with 12 seconds left on second down, instead of kneeling and having their punter run around like crazy on third down after a Manitoba timeout, they decided to run the ball. And what happened was a fumble. Nick Conway scooped and scored, the veteran Bison's linebacker. And on the 2-point conversion, there was a breakdown. Deshaun Lejour, standing by himself in the end zone, makes the catch from Jackson Tuchinski. Before you know it, the Dinos win by 12, but their season is over. I can't remember a meltdown like this at the NFL level, CFL level, college, university level. I don't know if I've seen a loss this heartbreaking on Madden. This was wild.
And I mean, the scene was just incredible because it was bizarre. Because Calgary's won the game. Manitoba knows they've lost the game, but everybody in the building knew the circumstances and knew what came out of it. So you've got a Manitoba team that, by the way, just lost the game by multiple scores that are celebrating their faces off while Calgary's devastated. It was really bizarre. And just further to the coaching decision there, like, you were up by 20, you could have taken a safety. Like, you had lots of meat on the bone to work with. I don't understand it. Transitioning to the other Canada West game, though, guys, I want to give some flowers to the UBC defense because they put on a fantastic performance this past weekend in Edmonton. Alberta had not been held to less than 26 points this season. UBC held them to just 10. 261 yards of offense. Eli Hetlinger only threw for, I think, 85 yards, less than 100. Just a fantastic performance by UBC to put the clamps on one of the best offenses in the Canada West and secure themselves home field advantage throughout the playoffs for a team that, we've talked about how the driver's seat has kind of bounced back and forth, and they really laid an egg in their first chance to lock it down in Calgary a couple weeks ago. For them to bounce back and do this when it mattered most, I was really impressed with that effort, particularly on the defensive side for UBC.
Gord, on this show, we have loved the Montreal Caravan all year, from post to post. Well, maybe that post ended at halftime of their game against Concordia this week. They're up 14-0 in front of a huge home crowd, and they just flip the off switch. They lose 16-14 on a field goal on the final play of the game. Do championship teams spoil a perfect record like that?
Yeah, I mean, probably not. I would like to give Montreal the excuse of they were home and cool, they had first place locked up, it didn't really matter. But then you look at the game, their starters were playing basically the entire game. Jonathan Senecal was the only quarterback that threw a pass for Montreal in that game. So if you want to sit there and go, well, they had nothing really to play for, well, that's fine. But then you would expect to see backups and third stringers littering the box score, and they're not. Senecal's line in this one was almost astounding in a lot of ways. Like, he had 148-yard completion in the first half, and on the rest of his 17 completions, he averaged less than 6.5 yards a completion. So, like, if you look at his completion percentage, you're like, great. You look at his overall numbers, and it's like 140 yards on 18 completions. And you're like, what just happened there? Like, how do you do that? And this honestly, like, it felt like old school Quebec RSEQ football, in that they just decided, you know what? We're just going to circle the wagons and play this just ultra conservatively. We think we can probably limp this one home. And if not, well, whatever. But not hardly the way that you want to work your way into the playoffs, especially with that rival in Quebec City looming that always is waiting to take their next swing at you. So, yeah, it was not a great weekend for Montreal. And, of course, on top of that, like, Jonathan Senecal, we're going to talk about it later on the show probably, but he might have cost himself the Hec Crighton trophy with this performance too.
Well, if you play your starters, you have to win, right? This is a team that has not gone undefeated since 2004. And had they played all their backups and lost, nobody would have batted an eye. But if you're starting your starters and you're playing them through the end of the game and risking injury, you have to win in front of your 6,000 plus crowd. And I do want to give credit to the Concordia Stingers for winning this one. Concordia always falls by the wayside as people talk about, of course, Laval and Montreal out in the RSEQ. Well, suddenly the Stingers, yeah, it's true, they did lose both of their matchups this season against the Rouge et Or, but who's to say they couldn't go to Laval and at least give them a run for their money? They were down 14-0 at halftime, very easily could have packed it in. Nobody would have questioned it. Instead, they come out, kick the game-winning field goal with zeros on the clock to win 16-14. Good for the Stingers, fighting to the very end.
Are the XXXL Ontario playoffs bigger and better? Did they prove that this week, Gord, or should we look at a bit of contraction down the road?
No, they're clearly not better. I mean, look, some of these situations are unavoidable, and the OUA is not the only conference that has had this happen. I want to make that clear and fair. But if your playoff model has sub 500 teams regularly making the playoffs, it's not a good playoff model. You know, like I jokingly said to the crew in our group chat on Saturday, I said, so which of the OUA playoff games was your favorite? What is it, the 69-point blowouts or the two games that had a combined 25 points in each of them? I mean, it was just, look, everybody I assume who's watched this program for a while knows I'm an offensively biased guy. But the thing is that most casual football fans are also offensively biased. So as much as I want to give credit to the defenses in the Queens-Ottawa game, for example, it was boring football. It really was. It was slightly better than the week before, but it was boring football. But that still was way better than the game that was over 5 minutes into the game in the battle. I don't even know if it's fair to call it the Battle of Waterloo, but the two Waterloo schools playing in the quarterfinals. So it was a really rough weekend, I thought, on the whole for the OUA. And they changed it to the 7-team system in the pandemic for pandemic-related reasons. And then they just kind of hoped people would forget about it and left it. And I don't really know what was wrong with the 6-team model that actually gave you a decent bar to clear, but I really think they need to revisit going back to that.
Yeah, there are 69 reasons why the XL playoff system that you're talking about, Jim, does not work. And that is the 69-0 final score between Windsor-Laurier and Waterloo. It is not good for Waterloo, obviously, to lose by that type of margin, but it's not good for the OUA. It's not good for U Sports. These playoff games need to be competitive. They need to be exciting. And when a game is, I think it was something like 45-0 at halftime, there is no reason whatsoever for anybody to tune into your product. And I think this ties into a larger conversation about whether the OUA needs multiple tiers. We all know that the bottom teams of the OUA, particularly York, simply can't compete with the top teams. There are also top teams that are bored for most of the year, waiting for some of those marquee matchups. So not only do I think the playoffs need to change, I think that should be part of a larger conversation about whether or not the conference regular season schedule should change.
Yeah, and they're not the only place where they have these balance issues that they're trying to address. You know, one of the structures that we've adopted in BC high school football the past couple of years is essentially a conditional playoff spot for certain conferences, one of them being the conference my team happens to be in, which is that you have to reach a certain seeding in order to get the playoff spot, but you also have to have a certain overall record in order to receive the playoff spot. Otherwise, that spot reverts to a bye for the upper seed. And maybe the OUA needs to adopt a structure like that just says, you know what, we can have a playoff that is as many as 8 teams even, but you have to have 4 wins on your schedule in order to qualify for the playoffs, or you're not making it. And then you just adjust and have as many buys as you need to that fit that description. Maybe that's a way to fix the problem. But the way that they're going right now, there's going to be one quarterfinal that nobody's going to be enthused about every year. It may not be as bad as 69-0, but it's rarely competitive.
Coming up, we take a look at the landscape of U Sports Award winners. At least we think. Welcome back, everyone. Okay, serious discussion time, as serious as we ever get here on Gridiron Nation. Let's talk about U Sports Awards right across the board. Now that the season is finally over, even though the OUA had the week of playoff games. Gord, I'll go to you first in terms of who you think is deserving of some of the many U Sports Awards out there.
Well, one that I want to hit on off the top is a guy out in my neck of the woods, and that's UBC offensive tackle Theo Benedette. Now, it is not unprecedented, but it is difficult for an offensive lineman to win the Metros Award for top lineman in the country, as it can apply to both sides of the ball, and offensive linemen don't have counting stats. But that being said, Theo Benedette has been outstanding this year. In my opinion, far and away the best offensive lineman in the country. He is a guy that I think has legitimate NFL possibilities. Obviously, he's already been drafted into the CFL. And so he's got the resume behind him, but he backed it up this year. And, UBC's offense, I still vividly remember when I was doing the Manitoba game at UBC and watching just the complete difference, the complete switch that flipped for the UBC offensive line when that game got out of hand and they took Benedette out of the game and put a backup in instead. And that backup was competent enough, but the difference between him and Benedette, the entire offensive line, was fundamentally different. Benedette can make a physical statement. He can get downfield and block out an open space. He could do just about anything for UBC. And while Garrett Rooker gets a lot of the headlines, for me, he is currently the face of that program. Yeah, he's the front runner for the Metros in my books, though I've never been known as a great predictor of these things.
No, I think Benedict is 100% the winner of that award. He won it last year, and I think he's going to be the first guy to repeat winning the JP Metros since somebody named Matthew Betts, who I'm pretty sure is breaking records right now with the BC Lions. But I want to talk about the Tyndall, which is, of course, going to go to the top coach in U Sports. And to me, the pick is JP Cercelli at Windsor. Now, look, the Windsor Lancers didn't finish in the top two of the OUA, but this team finished 6-2. That program is certainly on the rise. This team just hosted a playoff game for the first time since 2014. They won a playoff game for the first time since 2011. And they won a first home playoff game since 1975. Like 1975, Jim, I think you still had hair in 1975. Like this team is certainly on the rise, and I think absolutely Cercelli deserves a lot of credit since taking over that program in 2019.
Yeah, when I was thinking about the Tyndall Award, there were kind of three names that came to mind. Chris Morris out west, as well as Cercelli. I think Cercelli's the front runner as well. I would agree with you, John. But I do think Chris Morris is in that conversation for reasons that we discussed on this program at length before. And then another guy that I think looms because within U Sports, there's maybe more attention paid to the AUS than we pay, but that's Gary Waterman, who continues to run the regional powerhouse program at St. FX, who just runs roughshod over pretty much everybody in that conference and has for a number of years now. And so I do want to shout out Gary Waterman, who has done a fantastic job over the course of, I think it's over a decade now at St. FX that he's been there. And so I think he looms in this conversation as well. But for me, my money is on Cercelli, who's just done a great job with the Windsor program that for a lot of my adult life paying attention to the OUA has been basically irrelevant, and he's completely changed that math. So
for the President's Trophy, I think the pick will be Nick Weeb out of the University of Saskatchewan, the Oregon transfer, 60.5 tackles this season and 1 sack, truly as the heartbeat of that 3-4 Huskies defense. However, I also want to acknowledge a couple of AUS guys who I think should be in serious consideration. You've got Daniel Bell, who led the nation in tackles with 63.5, 1 sack and 1 fumble recovery with Mount Allison. Also, Gabriel Royer, who has been a game wrecker for a number of seasons with Bishops. He put up 41.5 tackles, 1.5 sacks, and 3 picks. And I will point out, gentlemen, as well, the Huskies had the number 1 ranked defense in Canada West, but nationwide, Mount Allison was 7th, and the Gators were number 1. And it is true that those teams were able to beat up on some of the weaker competition in the AUS, but I still think extremely impressive defensive performances from those 2 young men. I'm very interested to see who will get the conference nod between those two, because it's going to be a tight race.
Yeah, I agree. I really like Gabby Royer. He's been putting it on for a couple years now at Bishop's, a real standout over there. I know that the lineman award is a separate award in U Sports, and so D linemen don't often get consideration for the president. But I would love for Kalade Amason at Windsor, who we talked about earlier, for him to get some real consideration for this award. 11 and a half sacks this year and a couple fumble recoveries. I believe he had a defensive touchdown at one point too. He was a game wrecker on that side of the ball. He's the biggest challenge for Benedette for the Metros. But given that the President's Trophy is by definition just a defensive award, the top defensive player, I think if we're truly looking at that, then he's a guy that belongs squarely in that conversation, because I think those numbers are far more eye-popping than any of the guys that you just mentioned in your last rundown there.
So what about the Hec Crighton Award? We got a read from Montreal that Jonathan Senecal may not be a lead pipe cinch when it comes to this. What do you think, John?
With all due respect to Senecal and the great season that he had with the Caravans, to me, he was not my front runner. My front runner since at least the midway point of the season has been Taylor Elgersma with Wilfrid Laurier. The 6'6" passer from London, Ontario, has been sensational for the G-Hawks. He's completed over 75% of his passes, over 3,000 yards, 21 touchdowns, just 4 interceptions. You can't argue with that touchdown interception ratio. And by the way, he's ran for 9 touchdowns. I looked it up this morning. Trey Ford never had more than 8 rushing touchdowns during his U Sports career at Waterloo. Now, Elgersma is a different type of player. He's not as mobile. A lot of those touchdowns have come in short yardage. But when you're accounting for 30 touchdowns, you go 7-1 in the regular season, put up a 69-0 win in the postseason. To me, that is absolutely your Hec Crighton winner. He has been a revelation this year and somebody who I think has surpassed a lot of expectations to be who is, in my opinion, the top quarterback in U Sports by a considerable margin.
Yeah, I proclaimed on this program a couple weeks ago that I thought Senecal was not only the front runner, but had it just about locked up after their second victory over Laval. And I think that completely changed with them stepping on a banana peel this past weekend. I was never as locked in on Elgersma as not just John, but other people. Mike Hogan on this program, same thing, has been really on the Elgersma train. And I felt for a while that was people with CFL connections looking at Elgersma, the CFL prospect, as much as they were looking at what he was putting on the field. I thought Senecal, despite the touchdown count for Elgersma, that's on less than a third of the rushing yards that Senecal put up this year. He's much more of a dual threat guy that drives the bus for his offense in both facets of the game more than Elgersma does. So that was kind of my argument for Senecal. But the thing is that all changed. And I don't know that there's really a whole lot of drama going into the awards season for this, because in his last chance to put that last kind of star on his resume, Senecal fell flat.
Games of the week coming up next. And welcome back, Games of the Week time, and I will go to Gord first.
Okay, well, I'm going to head out to the East Coast, and I'm going to talk about a game with Canadians on both sides and a game between teams going in complete opposite directions right now. And it's Boston College traveling to upstate New York to face the Syracuse Orange. And Syracuse, after starting the season 4-0, finds themselves at 4-4. They have completely fallen flat getting into conference play, and now all of a sudden you look at their remaining schedule and you're struggling to find where they get to that magic number of 6 wins to become bowl eligible. If they're going to get there, they probably need to win this game at home against Boston College. But on the flip side, Boston College, featuring a couple Canadians on the offensive line, the aforementioned Kyle Hergel being one of them, have won 3 straight and have bounced back from what was a really rough start for them. So they're now sitting at 5-3 overall. They can punch their ticket to bowl season with a win here to the down bad Syracuse Orange, and I'm sure they'll be looking to do that. On the Syracuse side, one thing that was nice to see this past weekend, despite them getting smacked around a bit, was the re-emergence of Damian Alford, who had gone pretty cold for a couple weeks before that. So hopefully that remains a trend, because he still looks like, in my eyes, the most electric playmaker that they have on that offense.
I'm going to go the Can West playoff route here with the Saskatchewan Huskies at the Alberta Golden Bears. The Huskies have been to 4 straight Hardy trophies, but it's been a while since they've had to do it with an all-road playoff schedule. This team lost both of their regular season matchups against Alberta. It's going to be tough to get that team out 3 times in a row. As for the Golden Bears, this is their first home playoff game since 2005, and they're hoping to get their first playoff win since 2010. The Golden Bears did not have a good week this past week when UBC visited them. The Golden Bears squandered an opportunity to finish top in Canada West. It's rare that you get an opportunity to get right back into the thick of it and improve on that type of performance the next week. The Golden Bears do not want to let this opportunity slide away from them. They've got another game at Footfield. This one could get them to the conference championship game against, likely, those same UBC Thunderbirds. I'm excited for this one.
Since the Queen's Western game is being played in London, where Queen's hasn't won in over a decade, that kind of dampens my excitement on that game. If that was being played in Kingston again, after the way the game went the first time around, I would have been really fired up for Queen's Western, but because of that, I'm not particularly. So I'm going to go south of the line again, and I'm going to talk about a guy who has quietly had a really good season at a new location this year, and that's Isaiah Bagna at BYU. Now, BYU got beat up pretty good by Texas this past weekend, but as he often seems to do, Isaiah Bagna found a way to make a real splash play in this game, forcing and recovering a fumble at one point. He's been a real disruptor up front for BYU, a guy that put up good sack numbers at Boise State and then decided he was ready for a bigger challenge after an injury-plagued season last year. So they go into West Virginia to face the Mountaineers. West Virginia has been playing very, very well of late as well. So this is a nice little mid-tier matchup in the Big 12. I'm wanting to watch what BYU does. Prominent school, prominent Canadian, good matchup, all the makings of a game I want to be watching.
I'm going to go to the OUA playoffs for this one with Windsor at Windsor-Laurier. Now, the Lancers, in a way, are playing with house money for the reasons listed so far. They're 7-2 this season, including last week's playoff win, their first in a long, long time. But that being said, I do think there is a path for them to go in and upset the Golden Hawks. Surely the Laurier will be heavily favored, rightfully so. But if Danny Skelton, their quarterback, could do a better job of protecting the football, if Javoni Cunningham could do a great job of creating spark plays as he's done all season for the Lancers, I do think that Windsor can keep this one close. Windsor went 6-2 during the regular season. Their only big loss was against Windsor-Laurier. They played Western right to the end. If Windsor wants to take that next step, it might be a season too early, but if they are ready to take that next step, they'll keep this one close and competitive and possibly even eke out an upset.
It's playoff football time in Canada, so wherever you are, whatever you're doing, drop it and let's get out to the game.